Hi, folks. How are you doing? I hope you are all feeling well. Um, I wanted to talk through the two distinction elements of Unit 12. So we have to evaluate how the gameplay engages the audience, and we have to analyze any opportunities for further development, D1 and D2. So D1, evaluating the gameplay. Um, so evaluation essay. It's essentially a mini essay you're writing here. What is the purpose? The purpose of evaluating something is to determine the value of it, determine the extent to which it's achieving its goals. Okay, so you're making a decision, coming to a conclusion about how good or how bad something is. So if you, based on your feedback, decide that your game isn't engaging the audience, it's not a problem necessarily. That's the purpose of this evaluation. Find out whether it does or not. So we're going to use a structure. So since it is a mini essay, we do need a structure. So first of all, I want you to define what your game is. So this is the same slides, by the way, that we used for Unit 2. So at the risk of giving you flashbacks of your exam, some of this might be familiar to you. I have tweaked it to be more relevant to Unit 12. But so you're starting off with the topic. The topic is your game. So what type of game is it? What genre of game is it? What is it? Sort of leaning on mechanics? Is it leaning on sound or art style? What are its kind of were you what were its main strengths? And then think about the genre, the type of game, and the genre conventions. So if it's a sci-fi game, have you used lots of sci-fi shapes and colors and text styles, not textiles, lighting, sound, etc. I'd like you to mention there who your target audience is. It's a lot easier if you do have a specific target audience. If you need to evaluate something, if your audience is extremely broad, it's very difficult to gauge whether it's actually engaging that audience because there's too many people in it. And then, so once you've established the topic, once you've established what type of game we're evaluating here, I want you to write an initial statement of intent. So the same thing I got you to do for your 25 mark question or whatever it was for Unit 2. Set out the purpose of the evaluation. So just reiterate what I am saying here. That'll give you a few words towards the count of this essay. And then I'd like to determine the criteria. So we need a set of benchmarks in order to assess the game, and we'll assess the game against those benchmarks or criteria. And then against each of those criteria, you're going to make judgments, and then you're going to provide evidence to support those judgments. Okay, it's not just your opinion. There'll be an element of opinion, but you need to provide evidence and examples from your game. So if you are lacking slightly in evidence of feedback, you can take examples of parts of your game that really you can use to justify whether it is good or bad in that particular area. And then a short conclusion at the end where you bring it back round to the kind of, so you reiterate the question, reiterate your statement of intent, reiterate the criteria, and make a decision about whether you think it is engaging the audience or not. So we've got a slide on criteria, a slide on, I can't remember, but we'll get to that in a second. So in terms of criteria, establish what the kind of ideal type of game. So think about what type of game you've made and what is the ideal type of that game, so that you can come up with a set of criteria. So when we did the example for Unit 2 of a hotel, what would you would expect from a hotel? You'd expect it to have accommodation, a level of cleanliness, value for money, service, and those are the areas that you could then base your judgments about that hotel. So using my tried and tested example of Dark Souls, an action RPG needs to have these, there's certain elements that define an action RPG. The customizable character building usually has more of a linear storyline, so there may be decisions that you make, but not necessarily affecting the outcome. There's normally not any transitions or kind of barriers to combat. You just go straight into a fast-paced kind of hack and slash. It's a sort of combination of hack and slash combat with these kind of role-playing elements, putting points into various statistics and customizing a character. So once you've got those benchmarks in place, they can be used to evaluate whether they are engaging or not. So yes, making a judgment on those criteria. This is where you establish whether or not those benchmarks are being met. So in our Dark Souls example or Skyrim, how much can you actually customize your character? Does that customized character actually give you benefits in certain situations, or can you get through the whole game with one very specific type of character? Go through thinking about what are the positive parts of that criteria and what are the limitations. So each paragraph, you talk about one of those criteria, thinking about the limitations and the positives, and then providing some evidence. So you have to give information to back up these judgments. So in the hotel example, if you're going to make a judgment the quality of food didn't meet your expectations, then you need to be able to give evidence of that. You need to provide a photograph or testimony from other customers that had the same opinion. So when you're structuring your essay, there should be a paragraph for each of the criteria, and then within that paragraph, you explain what the criteria is. Okay, so if you're talking about customizable characters, what does that mean? The moderator's got no idea what that means. Explain what each of these criteria mean, and then you make the judgments about whether you think you've given a engaging enough level of customization, and then you give evidence. So feedback from your audience that talked about the 75 hours you spent on character creation. Offer supporting evidence. I have left a little bit here. There's a little bit of an over site. This is left in from when we were talking about the Unit 2 exam. And then just very briefly, it's not a review you're writing. A review is more opinion. You do not need to give references or sources or provide evidence. You don't need to set out a set of criteria or benchmarks when you're writing a review. Reviews tend to be more general. They don't tend to go very deep. They don't need to offer evidence. You are writing an analysis here where you have to make judgments based on set criteria, providing evidence, and coming to a conclusion based on the criteria and the evidence. Okay. Very quickly, D2 then, the opportunities for further development. I've got one slide on that because I am more than confident that you will have no problems here. So the recommended areas to think about would be downloadable content. Can it be adapted for different platforms? So what is it about your game that would make that easy or not so easy? Think about things like the controls. In terms of sequels or prequels, do you have a story that could be continued or developed? Could you reuse your assets in a spin-off or in a sequel? Could you think about your game in terms of it being a prototype that could be remastered or could be developed into a full build with more resources, with more time, that kind of thing? Okay, we've had very, very strict restrictions and limitations on this project, so there's going to be plenty of opportunities there for development. A good chunky paragraph under each of those headings, and you'll be fine. So very quickly then, the example I wanted to talk about was very quickly just run through the game so you got an idea what the sort of game is that that she's talking about in the evaluation. So this is a game, a kind of narrative-based, story-driven game where everything was themed around paper and books. So we had this origami-styled paper-folded character and similar environment elements, props. We have this interactive wolf, also in the style of folded paper. And then the environment was literally a book. So the idea of the story was you were kind of going through pages of the book. You were interacting with different elements in the story, literally in the book. And you could change words in the text that you discover. And you could adapt the story. You could use your imagination to change the story as you go. It was actually pretty cool. So that was the type of game. And then the evaluation, I've taken it out of our slides and broken it down a little bit into these headings. So starting off with the topic, it is actually a little bit waffly to begin with here. Engaging the audience is very important for any game as it keeps the player interested and immersed, enticing them to continue. And then she hints at the benchmarks here: visuals, style, concept, sounds, mechanics. And then there's a bit more specific here about the type of game. I want the experience to feel like all the events that happen in the game are words that have been brought to life in the form of origami shapes. A new way of storytelling, capturing interest. Then, as the game proceeds, the story is unraveled. And then, very briefly, states the criteria, the benchmarks. So, therefore, the criteria I'm going to base the evaluation on: visuals, interactivity, replayability, usability, and sound. And then each of those criteria are tackled one paragraph at a time. So here we've got the visuals, simplistic, plain, flat colors, stylized appearance makes it distinctive, and then a bit of feedback to back that up. The feedback I received from the audience confirmed that these elements made it immersive, and the feedback is not amazing. One comment stated, "The game tells a good story and is beautiful." But, that's enough. The game is very cinematic and engaging, with reference to the great environment. Interactivity, mechanics, I don't think she had a lot of feedback specifically on that. Replayability, usability, interactivity, so discusses the interactive nature of the game, how the main character is exploring the environment, so it has this explorative element, and then a bit of feedback discussing that. The audience feedback I received confirmed that this element was engaging. One comment mentioned the game presents challenges and solutions. And then the same thing for the use of sound. All the feedback I received commented on how the use of sound made the game engaging. They stated the suitable audio made the game immersive, and that sounds and art suit the genre. And then just a very brief conclusion here. Having selected criteria based on the ideal type of narrative-based game, and considering the feedback I received against the criteria, I conclude that my game suitably engaged the audience. Across the areas of visuals, mechanics, blah, 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 I received positive feedback. Okay, so that's what we're looking for. So this is a student example that I've tweaked a little bit to make it a bit more relevant for you guys. But, it's not 20 pages long, and it's not one paragraph. It mentions specific criteria and has comments, has quotes from her feedback to back up any claims and provide evidence. So that's about it. I'll give you a bit of time to do a bit more feedback. I mean, the time is pretty limited, but you may have to go back and do a bit of feedback with presumably members of your family, if anybody is available at home to have another look at you or to have a look at your game. I'll make some feedback sheets available, and I have photographed all the individual sheets of feedback that were left in the classroom and uploaded them to Google Drive, so I'll share them with you also. I hope that helps. Get in touch, please. If you've got any questions, leave comments, fire me an email, and I'll leave you there. Bye for now.